thing that I wanted to think about, which is, so, a major part of doing ethical interviews is the consent process. And we all know that the IRBs work us through various steps, and it's complicated. And I've always been given permission to get oral consent because getting people's physical signature itself causes more problems, is potentially more risk and certainly more anxiety. But it's the consent process and telling someone, I will be doing the research for this purposes, and you have the right to refuse any question. And, and if you have any problems, you can contact all the things that the IRBs expect us to do. We all know are pretty awkward and uncomfortable, and also often cause more anxiety for you and for the interviewee, and are problematic in all sorts of ways. One nice thing I found about doing in-person interviews is that I have a note that lays out, this is how I've been doing it. I don't know if this will work for every project, that lays out all of that. This is who I am. This is the research I'm doing. I'm seeking to ask you about this. I would ask your permission to record. I would store the recording in this way. All the kinds of information that I've always found to be extremely uncomfortable, but yet necessary to do in person, are all easily laid out in a letter. And I send that letter out when I'm even asking someone to do, and if you're given all this, if you're interested, if you're willing and interested to do an interview with me, please contact me. So I find that sending that letter out, all of the necessary information for the consent process is there. It's clear. Somebody has full time and space to read it, to consider it, to think about whether or not they want to do an interview with me. And then it's sort of in their hands. And then I wait for that person to contact me back and saying, yes, I'll do an interview. So in some ways, I feel like there's, rather than someone already agreeing to do an interview with you, and you're sitting there together in person, and then you go through that consent process, I feel like it's almost a more robust, free consent process for somebody to have the information laid out before them, to read it in a letter, and then to decide to contact me and say, yeah, I'd like to do an interview. And then once we have the interview, once we're there in person, again, I ask for permission to record and ask if there's any questions, sort of, again, review it. But a lot of these details about, I will store your interview in a password protected, blah, blah, blah. I feel like it's worked almost better to have it go, which is something that probably would not happen in an in-person setting. You meet someone, you don't say, you usually aren't in a setting where you meet someone, you give them a letter and you say, I'll come back in a week if you want to do this interview. Whereas given that in an online setting, you're arranging the interview in advance via this kind of online communication. You're passing notes, emails, or WhatsApp messages back and forth to arrange it. It becomes almost more convenient to have that consent process become part of that necessary pre-communication. That's one thing that came to mind. I'm going to let Rima take it from here because I know she's got more to say, and that you guys probably have lots of comments and questions too.
Yeah, thank you. And I totally agree. I also found this to be, ethically easier because people have time. You're already establishing contact with them through email or whatever other medium you're using. So it's, and they have time to read. So you can skip. You still need to do very briefly at the beginning, but you can skip that awkward part of interviews where you have to, you have to explain and read all these forms out. Other ethical concerns are to do with, the question of privacy that we talked about and confidentiality. Again, we need to bear in mind that not everyone has a comfortable home or a comfortable room alone in a home where they can sit and feel, that it's safe enough or private enough for them to talk. For those who have, it's great, and this is where the interview can really be very, interesting, go in depth. For others, where you feel that, I've done interviews where I felt that my interviewee is not completely comfortable, they keep on checking the door, or this is where that there's something with what we're saying, the context, and this is where questions of privacy and confidentiality arise, again depending on what the topic is and what we're researching, but these are things that we need to keep in mind, right? Now maybe once the pandemic is over and we can go back to our offices or spaces, or when people will have we'll go out more, so home can be more homey or private during certain hours, maybe things will change. But during the pandemic and during the lockdown, these were things that ethically one has to keep in mind when doing that. Other issues that I have been thinking about are the question of cost and remuneration. And what it means. I mean, I'm sure if you've taken any methods course, you know that there's a huge debate in the literature going on for decades about, should we pay, should we not pay, how do we do this, what is ethical, is time money or not, etc. But with online interviews, and I've usually been on the side of not pay, but maybe do other things depending on what the topic is. But with the online interviews, I started to think more of whether I need to revise this position, because, as I said, we are costing. So again, I'm not prescribing anything, and I'm not doing this myself so far. I'm not paying, but sometimes I think if there's a small grant. Maybe again, depending on whom. I mean, if you're interviewing people who are rich and have great internet, you don't need to maybe think about this. But sometimes, thinking about whether you can, for example, cover whatever a month subscription, or it would be a small fee, but something to show that you appreciate and that you acknowledge and you're aware that this is not only taking time, but this is also costing them. And especially if you want to ask them to turn on their videos, or you want to, you're recording. So this is one area that I think we will have to start thinking more about, and I'm sure there will be many debates in the literature, and I'm sure there will be a lot of articles written about this. But I can. I mean, within my brains, there's already a debate on whether we should do this or not. Again, cyber safety, we've discussed this, but I want to reiterate how important it is. You need to really know which platforms are safer. There isn't 100% safety online. We all know this, right? Even when they say it's fully encrypted, I mean, there's always a bit of, at least maybe this is me being suspicious, but yeah, we need to think about the ethics of either putting yourself or putting your interviewees in, and this is what we do with physical interviews, right? You need to think about questions of safety, and here we need to integrate the question of cyber safety. In terms of politically, what is the context we're doing the interview within, what are the questions we're going to ask, maybe removing some questions, asking them differently, but also sometimes maybe stopping your interviewee when you feel that things are going in a direction that might put them in danger, diverting, trying to ask, or sometimes people give us details that we don't really want for this research, and that might put them in danger. So again, this is where one needs to know how to deal with those cases, and where to stop or where to continue. But cyber safety is also, again, like everything else, is also about is also gendered, is also racialized, and it's both ways. Sometimes there were questions about whether it's better to do interviews over WhatsApp, maybe, but also we have to think about when you give your private number to a lot of people that you don't know, harassment, you know, and again, I'm assuming that all interviewees and every researcher will have to abide by the ethics. And of course, you know, you don't harass people you interview, but sometimes it's the other way around, right? Or sometimes people will want to still contact you for other things, which usually is fine. But there's a very thin line that with this hyperconnectivity can become easily blurred, and we need to be aware of this, because sometimes out of goodwill we might end up doing things that later on will be interpreted as unethical, or you know, that we shouldn't have done it this way, but we did it because we thought we were helping, or whatever it is. I mean, there are too many scenarios that can happen. So yes, I think cyber safety both ways, cyber safety, gendered, but also politicized. What does it mean to ask questions that might put anyone at risk? I think. Yeah, one last point I have here that we haven't discussed is the language of the interview. And I think there was a question about having an interpreter or translation. I think it's important to think about this. Yes, technology can help us do things faster, and maybe, you know, there are apps or softwares where I know that, you know, we can transcribe more easily. Sometimes we can translate. It's not the best translation, but we can still have a sort of communication. Usually, of course, ideally, it's best to speak to people in their own language if you can. If not, yes, I mean, the arrangement that you use. I haven't, obviously I speak Arabic, so I haven't tried having an interpreter, but I've tried having a research assistant who's actually here, Sally. And it works well. So yeah, I mean, sometimes if, you know, it's easier when we want to, especially when, you know, sometimes we don't have a lot of time and we don't want to do a full transcript, but we want to get a few things. So someone else is also in the interview, transcribing quickly or typing notes. And then after so it's a sort of triangulation, right? It's having another person. After we're done with the interview, we stay online and we take some time to discuss how we both, you know, given our research questions, how we both reflect on this interview, what are the main highlights. It makes it much easier later when we want to code or when we want to start the analysis to have those notes written down. So I found it really helpful to have another researcher in the interview sometimes. But it's important. I think from our experience, it's important to explain at the beginning the setting, because if there's someone who's silent but there, people will become uncomfortable, right? So it's important at the beginning, but also I think if both researchers can also participate in, like, again, it depends on your research design, but like Sally and I have been doing interviews this past month, and, you know, sometimes she jumps in and prompts with another question. Sometimes it's me. So the interviewee feels that we're having, the three of us are having a conversation.